Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Mike Osterholm, Regents Professor and Director of the Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy here at the University of Minnesota. Today, CIDRAP, the Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy, together with the Wellcome Trust and in collaboration with the World Health Organization, will be hosting this webinar to address the draft research and development roadmap for Lassa fever, for Nipah. We've done several other ones. We've done a previous Nipah webinar last week, as well as that for Ebola, Marburg, and for Lassa fever. This webinar is intended to engage a broad audience in the review and further development of draft roadmaps by offering opportunities for stakeholders such as yourself who may not be familiar with the process to learn more about the goals for each roadmap and to provide feedback. The three roadmaps for Nipah, Lassa fever, and Ebola, Marburg are actually on the WHO website, which will give you the direction later in the presentation. And we are looking for public comments through June 8th, and I will address that more in just a moment. So today we're addressing Nipah Research and Development Roadmap, and we'll provide you the overview that you may better inform the process. The topics I'll be covering today include the actual R&D blueprint roadmap itself from the WHO, priority diseases and how they were established, Nipah background. It's of note that we are experiencing a Nipah outbreak as we speak in India. Roadmap purpose and objectives, the task force members who are engaged in this process, a roadmap vision and architecture overview, roadmap strategic goals, a timeline and public comment period overview and how you can access that. And then we'll actually have time for questions and answers. You'll note on your screen in the lower right-hand side is a chat section where you can type your question in, and we will take those at the end of the presentation. So let me first start with an overview of the R&D blueprint for action to prevent epidemics. As you know, this was an outgrowth of the 2014-16 epidemic of Ebola virus infection in West Africa, when it was realized that we needed to do much more to forward both vaccines, diagnostics, and therapeutics for the kinds of diseases that can cause the situation we saw in West Africa. The three pillars of this process is A, improving coordination and fostering an enabling environment, B, accelerating research and development processes, and finally, developing new norms and standards tailored to the epidemic context for these three areas. Now, in terms of the blueprint overview itself, note that on the far upper left corner, you see prioritization and list of priority diseases. This was actually done initially with work by the Scientific Advisory Group to the World Health Organization, the SAG, as it's so well known by. They developed the prioritization criteria, then together with the WHO, developed a list of priority diseases. This is a very fluid process yet. Diseases may be added as time goes on to this area here. Then what you see with the R&D roadmap process for these specific priority diseases, including below that, the development of products, clinical trial design, regulatory pathways, and even into the data sample and sharing input. This has all come from a global coordination mechanism where all stakeholders, from the private sector, the public sector, academia, regulatory agencies, etc., have all been sought out for their input as to how best address each of these topic areas. Then in the far upper right-hand corner, you see the target product profiles, which is under the purview of WHO, and that process is ongoing. What is yet to be determined is in that far lower right-hand side is the more monitoring and evaluation activity. This will be under the auspices of WHO, but yet to be determined exactly how it will be done. But it will be a very important part of the ongoing roadmap process. Now, in terms of priority diseases, let me just give you an overview of how this was developed and how it was determined which diseases to choose. First of all, for the purpose of the R&D blueprint, WHO has developed a special tool for determining which diseases and pathogens to prioritize for research and development in public health emergency context. Obviously, this is based on historic data and anticipation of what could be in the future. This tool seeks to identify those diseases that pose a public health risk because of their epidemic potential and for which there are no or insufficient countermeasures. It's interesting that at this point we are embarked right now on both a Nipah virus outbreak in India, as well as, you know, the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. If you look at the, in terms of the overall updates of this, the second annual review occurred in February 2008, and there is a link to that document should you want to pursue that and look at that further. Now, in terms of the priority diseases we have to date, Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever, Ebola and Marburg virus diseases, Lassa fever, the Middle East respiratory syndrome coronavirus or MERS-CoV, and severe acute respiratory syndrome or SARS, Nipah and hemipneusal viral diseases, as well as Rift Valley fever, Zika, and Disease X. Disease X is more recently added. It represents a knowledge base that we need to embark upon in terms of anticipating a serious international epidemic that be caused by a pathogen currently unknown to cause human disease. And so that the R&D blueprint really is trying to develop the kind of cross-cutting R&D preparedness that's relevant for this type of situation. Imagine we look back on the first emergence of HIV, imagine the first emergence of the various coronavirus infections. Any one of these, you can see at that time they would have been disease X. Now, in terms of the Nipah background, it was first identified following an outbreak in Malaysia and Singapore in 1998 and 1999. Nearly annual outbreaks have been identified in Bangladesh since 2001. A case fatality rate as low as 40% has been seen in Malaysia and Singapore to as high as 75 to 100% in Bangladesh. The natural reservoir, as best we know to date, is the Therapus bat species and has had a wide geographic range. This often involves date palm oil contamination by these bat species with a very significant zoonotic potential. As I mentioned to you a moment ago, there currently is an outbreak that's occurring in India. To date, there have been at least 10 deaths documented. It's in the Kerala state in southern India. 12 of 18 samples from patients have been positive. Currently, 9 individuals are under surveillance for this, and 94 individuals have been quarantined. The outbreak appeared to have started in a single family, and again, bat-human contact relative to a food source appears to be the primary concern here of this issue. Now, in terms of actually developing the R&D blueprint, there actually is a document that was developed called the generic methodology. This document is not generally available for use in terms of the public. We've been using it as part of our work here. It is, again, a document in process and in progress. It will continue to be updated, and we are providing our feedback from the work that we're doing with the R&D roadmap to help inform that. The WHO developed this methodology to provide a systematic approach for creating roadmaps. It's about a 40-page long document. The roadmap methodology really tries to accomplish the following. First, it lays out the architecture for each roadmap. It defines the target audiences for the roadmaps, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. It identifies roles and responsibilities for key partners across both public and private sectors, all areas that I mentioned before for stakeholder involvement. It identifies and addresses 6 key elements that need to be considered for each roadmap development. They are, number 1, stakeholder participation, absolutely critical. Resource constraints, understanding that unless there's a business model or some other way of specific funding that this is going to be a challenge. Critical inputs, what do you need to establish a sound baseline for developing the roadmap? The overall roadmap design itself, what will work so that it can be used by the multitude of different stakeholders. Buy-in and dissemination, a process we're working on right here, right now, to make sure that people understand the process and that they are on board. And then finally, as that point that I mentioned earlier, monitoring and tracking. We all know what happens when a document gets produced, sits on a shelf or inside a computer, and that's it. And so our goal here is to make certain that we have a very active follow-up following the roadmap development. Now, in terms of the roadmap purpose, as I alluded to, but by providing a framework to help plan and coordinate technology developments, roadmaps are pivotal in understanding markets for innovative products and identifying ways to leverage R&D investments through coordinating research activities across a multitude of different partners. Let me just say here that this has been a very important part of the expert meetings that we've held so far with the roadmap process. That in fact, we understand the business model has to be there as well as the science. If one looks at the roadmap objectives, as I stated earlier, it is to engage partners and shareholders, to build consensus on goals and priority ideas and activities, to identify the critical steps, challenges, and barriers, and to promote implementation and coordination of research and development. We are very fortunate to have been served by a 13-member task force group on the Nipah roadmap process. Here you see some of the members listed. I think there are names that are familiar to many of you who are involved with Nipah. As you can see also here, the remaining members. And so we have been guided by them. We actually had a meeting earlier this spring in London at the Wellcome Trust with this group, as well as other subject matter experts. We will continue to meet with the task force members with frequent communication with them, and their input, again, has been virtually invaluable. In terms of the Nipah roadmap vision, is to really have robust medical countermeasures to detect, prevent, and control outbreaks of Nipah virus infection or other closely related viruses that are readily available and accessible for use in areas of known or potential Nipah virus spillover. These medical countermeasures include 1, the rapid, accurate point-of-care diagnostics, 2, safe and effective treatment and post-exposure prophylaxis, and 3, safe and effective vaccines to prevent disease, disability, and death. Now, in terms of the roadmap architecture itself, this is the first of 2 slides showing what this architecture is about. There are 4 main sections. One is the cross-cutting topics that address all of the different areas of diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines. And then, of course, there's an architecture related to each of these particular areas. In addition, primary challenges, key needs, and knowledge gaps have been identified, for all of the different areas here of product development. Strategic goals developed, and I'll define that more in a moment what that is. And then identified priority areas and activities, including research, product development, key capacities at international and even local levels, and then policy and commercialization. Now, in terms of the strategic goal itself, as part of the methodology, strategic goals are the planned objectives that a roadmap task force aims to achieve over the period of a strategic plan, whether it be 1 year, 5 years, or 10 years. And this will be the ongoing monitoring process we talked about. Strategic goals determine the long-range direction of the research priority areas identified through a road mapping process. They should reflect a realistic assessment of the environment, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and should be based on the stated vision. This is an important concept because, again, it's about that feedback loop of the goal assessment, determining what the long-range direction should be, and then going back and making sure, and I'll mention this more in a moment, with milestones that these are being met. Now, in terms of the cross-cutting topics across all 3 product areas, there are 4 such cross-cutting topics. The first one identifies sources of funding and develop appropriate private sector incentives and competitions to promote the R&D of these Nipah virus medical countermeasures. Number 2, stimulate and support basic science research for better understanding of Nipah virus virology, pathogenesis, and the immune response in humans and animals. The third and fourth, strategically strengthen laboratory, clinical, and public health infrastructure and capacity at local and national levels in areas of known or potential spillover. And finally, engage national regulatory agencies, particularly in endemic and at-risk areas, to gain guidance on requirements for clinical trials, regulatory pathways, and other considerations that will impact medical countermeasure development, acceptance, and post-license or surveillance. I can't emphasize enough how important this area is, and the regulatory agencies have been involved with input and buy-in into this area. In terms of strategic goals for diagnostics, there are 4 of these also. Obtain a better understanding of the kinetics of Nipah virus detection at various points during the clinical course of illness to allow improved diagnostic capability across the disease spectrum. To develop and assess affordable, highly sensitive and specific point-of-care Nipah virus diagnostic tests. For this case, use in humans and animals that are sufficiently robust for the conditions in which they'll be used and that have minimal requirements for biosafety precautions and staff training. Consideration should surely be given to development of multiplex assays that can detect the related viruses in addition to Nipah virus, or that can detect other pathogens of concern in endemic or at-risk areas. Generate guidance on deploying strategies and use of diagnostic tests for Nipah virus detection in areas of known or potential Nipah virus spillover risk. 4, enhance diagnostic preparedness in areas of known or potential Nipah virus spillover risk to promote early detection of Nipah viruses or any of the other emergent Nipah viruses in humans and animals. In terms of therapeutics, there are two such goals. One is to develop, evaluate, and license therapeutic agents for treatment of Nipah virus infection and for post-exposure prophylaxis to prevent Nipah virus infection, ensure that therapies are readily available, affordable, and accessible in areas of known or potential Nipah virus spillover. Finally, to develop guidance for the use of therapeutics for disease treatment and post-exposure prophylaxis as therapies become available. The last category for vaccines, and that we're talking about here, are to develop, evaluate, license, and deploy Nipah virus vaccines in humans and potentially in animals, to continue research cross-protection of the candidate vaccines against the Nipah viruses and potentially other emergent Nipah viruses as needed. Now, in terms of the last goal, the final one is to develop and refine guidance on vaccine use in humans and animals that aligns with the current Nipah virus epidemiology and takes into consideration attributes of new vaccines as they become available. In terms of the work that's been done to date, the in-person roadmap consultation I referred to earlier that included the task force members was held on March 1st and 2nd at the Wellcome Trust in London. As you now know, the draft roadmap is available online for public comment. That was put up on May 7th on the WHO website. It will be available through June 8th. We're doing the roadmap webinars with the final one today. We will incorporate feedback and create final drafts during the month of June. At that time, all input should have been received. We'll continue to revise documents with input from WHO and other key partners through July and August, with publishing the final roadmap document sometime in August or early September, and begin the roadmap dissemination process in September. In terms of the roadmap availability online, I mentioned that already, that it's there. You can see the link to the website. There is on that site the roadmap document, the target product profile as established to date by WHO, and then a comment form by which you can then submit your comments by June 8th. The online roadmap document is 19 pages in length. It is still missing the milestones, the critical path analysis, and schedule of resources, coordination, and implementation, as three category areas will be filled in with this very process that we're doing right now. So with this, I would like to ask if there are any questions in the group. Again, please hit your chat button down below on the right-hand side, and please use the webinar chat function now, and we'll take those. We have some questions that have come in already, and I'll start with those first. First one, I agree that involving industry in this process is very important. Can you tell us how industry representatives are being involved in the roadmap development? Very important question, and one that we believe has been a real part of the likely success of this process. We've reached out to some industry colleagues directly, and we've had industry representatives at in-person consultation, the one that we held in March. We're also working with organizations such as CIPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, and FIND, which is the Foundation for Innovative New Diagnostics, and we've asked them to help reach out to industry stakeholders as well and inform them of the public comment periods of the roadmap. So we're looking forward to getting their comments in addition to what they have provided to date. Another question, if conflicting comments are submitted during this review, how will they be adjudicated in the final draft? Again, very important. Answer here is, to us, all comments will be reviewed and taken into consideration. So everything that gets submitted will be reviewed by our group and as well as the task force. And we will be meeting with the task force members again in July and in London, and these comments will be taken to them to best adjudicate any conflicting comments. Another question, will new funding be made available to tackle these areas? One of the purposes of the roadmap is to provide a set of priority actions for implementation, and we hope that having the roadmap will stimulate funding organizations to provide targeted resources towards these high priority areas. The WHO is still working on steps for implementing the roadmap, but we hope that some sort of advocacy process will be incorporated in the implementation, or else we realize the limited success that we could anticipate. This is obviously going to require ongoing iterative follow-up over time, and I know that WHO is very committed to this very process. Will these slides be made available for us? Answer is yes. You can have these slides. They'll be available, and the webinar will be posted on the CIDRAP YouTube channel in the next day or two, so go to our website That's CIDRAP. You'll be able to get to the YouTube channel. You also may be able to come to to me directly. My email address is mto@umn.edu, and I'm more than happy to send a set of the slides to you. So I think that's all the questions we have right now. Unless I see any others, I just want to remind you again to go to the WHO site. Please provide your comments. Please let your colleagues know about the document there. This is a critical part of the roadmap process, is to get this kind of informed input. And I can just see by the attendees on this call today that we have some real experts here. So we hope that you will participate. With that, I will sign out and thank all of you for your participation and interest in this very important process. Thank you very much.